Right, welcome to Module 4, Lesson 2, Dividing with Fractions. Today we're going to talk about how to find quotients of fractions and fractions, how to create equations from word problems that are involving quotients of fractions and fractions, and how to solve those real-world problems that involve quotients of fractions and fractions. So we're going to be doing a lot of division here. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at what's actually happening when we're dividing with fractions. So I have this person and I want to know how many burritos this person can make. So ultimately that's my question. But what I have to look at is what am I working with here? I'm working with only 3/4 of a cup of salsa, and I know that each serving requires 1/8 of a cup of salsa. So I have to figure out how many of these are in this. So if you're looking at your salsa itself, you have 3/4 of the cup left. So I want to know how many 1/8 servings are in here. So what that means is I can't just split this into eighths. I have to remember I still have this top part up here that also is a part of those eighths. So let's take a look at a picture. I have, let's see, I'll make it red for salsa. So I have a full cup of salsa right here. But now what I have to remember is I'm only working with 3/4 of it. So I have to cut it into fourths. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm only working with this much. Right? So this is the piece that I'm working with. But I know that 1/8 of a cup is a serving. So in this whole entire cup of salsa, I want to look at how many eighths there are. So I'm going to cut this whole thing into eighths. So that would be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Because I know in one cup of salsa, there should be 8 servings. But I'm not working with that full cup. I'm only working with this 3/4 of a cup. So I want to know inside here how many 1/8 cups are there. So I can look at that breakdown as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So inside of 3/4 of a cup, there are only 6 1/8 servings. So I can only make 6 burritos. What you have to remember is when you're cutting up this 1/8 cup, you're cutting up the entire cup and then seeing how that impacts the 3/4 of the cup. Okay, you're not just cutting up the 3/4, you have to do it to the entire fraction, to the entire number. So here when we're looking at our people that are splitting cheese, we want to know how much cheese each person gets. And I know that there is a 1/2 pound of cheese, and that 5 people are splitting up that 1/2 pound. Again, I have to first start by looking at a full pound of cheese. I'll go ahead and make it yellow because it's cheese. So here's my full pound of cheese. I know that I'm only working with 1/2 of it. So I'm only working with this piece. Right? So here, let me get rid of this little extra line there. So here, I want to know how much each person is going to get if there's 5 people. So I'm going to split it up into 5 sections. So that person gets that, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we have to remember that this isn't 1/5. That is not correct because we have to look at what it would do to the whole thing of cheese. So what I did to this 1/2, I also have to do to the other 1/2. So I have to also split it into 5, 3, 4, 5. And now I see that there are 10 pieces. So each of these isn't worth 1/5. It's actually worth 10. So each of these is worth 1/10. So in this case, when I split it into the 5 parts, each part is actually worth 1/10 because the whole thing of cheese got split into 10 pieces because each 1/2 pound got split into 5. So 5 here and 5 here. So then I know that each person will receive 1/10 of a pound. Right? We're going to work a little bit more with this in class where we're actually breaking it up and using picture models to help, but hopefully this helps you understand why when you do 3/4 divided by 1/8, why you get 6 and it's the correct answer. Okay, so in this case, I already showed you the first division problem that it was 3/4 divided by 1/8 and it gave us 6. And then the second division problem, I took 1/2 pound of cheese, I divided it by 5 and it gave me 1/10. Right? So when we're taking a fraction and dividing it by another fraction, you'll notice that your answer is actually getting larger. But when you're taking a fraction and dividing it by a whole number, your answer will get smaller. All right, so now we're actually going to take a look at the math of it and how that works. But first you have to remember what a reciprocal is. So reciprocals are numbers that when you multiply them together, they give you 1. So for example, if I have 3/4 and I want to multiply it by something that's going to ultimately give me 1. I have to think about a fraction and remember that a fraction that is equal to 1 has to have, so whatever is on top is the same as what's on bottom. So like if I have a 33 here, then I have to get a 33 here. So, and that works for anything. So that could be, 4/4, that could be 308 over 308. It doesn't matter. As long as it's the same on top and on bottom, it is going to be equal to 1. So I have to think of what is going to allow me to get something that's the same on top as it is on bottom. Well, if I multiply, and I look at this and say, okay, if I do 3 times 4, that'll give me 12. And then to get 12 on the bottom, I could do 4 times 3, and that would give me 12/12. This is always going to work. So if you take a fraction and you flip it, and you multiply them together, you're always going to get 1. Because think of it. If I multiply 4 by 3, which is my numerator, and then take 3 and multiply it by 4, which is my denominator, it's the same multiplication problem, just in a different order. So it should give me the same answer. So when you're finding a reciprocal, you're literally just flipping the fraction. But you also have to understand that part of the definition is that when you multiply these together, you get 1. So you're going to get 2 numbers over each other that are the same, which ultimately gives you 1. So it's not that we're getting 1/1. We're getting 12/12, which is equal to 1. So again, reciprocals, actually I lied. When I told you guys that multiplication was the easiest thing you would do with fractions, I forgot about reciprocals. Reciprocals are amazingly simple because literally all you do is flip them. So looking at the first example, I want to know what's the reciprocal of 2/9. Well, if I take 2 and multiply it by 9, and 9 and multiply it by 2, that gives me 18/18, which is equal to 1. So the reciprocal of 2/9 is 9/2. Again, if I take 1 and multiply it by 8, and 8 and multiply it by 1, I will get 8/8, and I get 1. So the reciprocal of 1/8 is 8/1. Actually, there shouldn't be an equal sign there because those are not all equal. But the reciprocal is 8/1. Well, now here's the thing. I want to take 5 and multiply it by something that is ultimately going to give me 1. Well, I have to remember what happens to a whole number when I make it improper. It becomes 5/1. So then when I flip it, so this is not the reciprocal, this is the improper fraction, then I have to flip it. Because if I take 5 and multiply it by 1/5, it gives me 5/5, which gives me 1. If I were just to multiply it by 5, that would give me 25, which wouldn't work. So the reciprocal of any whole number is the number under a 1, because its improper fraction is the number over 1. Right? The other piece of this, which I'm going to give you a little heads up when we talk about improper fractions, or when we talk about mixed numbers, you have to make them improper before you can find the reciprocal. So just a little heads up on that one. Okay, so is any number its own reciprocal? And if so, what number or numbers? Well, when we're looking at this, the only number that can be its own reciprocal, so the only number that when you multiply it by 1 gives you 1 is 1. Because 1 times 1 is 1, and no matter which way you flip it, I mean, if it was 1 over 1 and 1 over, like, it's its own reciprocal, okay? That's the only number that that's going to work for, though. All right, does every number have a reciprocal? Explain. So the only number, let's think about this. You might want to jump to saying yes, because as long as you flip it, it gets you to 1. However, what about this guy? 0. Anything times 0 is 0. So 0 actually does not have a reciprocal. And we can make this a little bit easier on ourselves. Or I can make this easier on you by typing instead of writing, because I know that that takes me a little while and it doesn't always turn out the way I want it to. So 0 does not have a reciprocal because anything times 0 equals 0. So there is no way to get a product of 1. Right? So hopefully that makes sense, that 0 wouldn't have a reciprocal because no matter what you multiply it by, you get 0. And then the only number that's its own reciprocal is 1, because 1 is the only thing that you can multiply by 1 to get 1. Okay, so the reciprocal of a whole number is a fraction with, well, just like we said before, it's a fraction with 1 in the numerator. Just like an improper, so a whole number turned into an improper fraction has 1 in the denominator. Its reciprocal will have 1 in the numerator. So I want you to go ahead and take a minute. I want you to try these your turns and then come back and check your answers. So you should have a pen so you can write. There we go. 8/7, and actually you should have a pencil so you can write. You should have 1/9, and you should have 11/1. Like I said, pretty simple. Okay, so now how do we use this when it comes to dividing fractions? Well, just like when we talked about, or later on we'll talk about adding opposites, when you are dividing by a fraction, it's the same thing as multiplying its reciprocal. Okay, so they're the same thing. So if I'm going to divide by 1/4, so this is the same as doing this. Same. Because to be honest with you, when we're dividing with fractions, you don't want to mess with actually doing division. That's why we switch it to multiplication of the reciprocal, because we all like multiplication much better. So you have to remember, you have to rewrite it as multiplication using the reciprocal of the divisor. So we have to practice which one's the divisor and which one's the dividend. So what I want you to start doing while we're practicing is you're always going to take a red pencil, and you are going to circle the divisor. So in this case, I know that 3/2 is the divisor, and then I'm going to write its reciprocal in red as well. That way I know that I have flipped the correct one. Now I can change it to multiplication, and I have 5/9 that stays the same. This is going to help anybody who's working with you. It's going to help us to make sure that you are flipping the correct number. Now, if you take a look at this, I kept 2/3 the same. Because of the fact that I did it in red, my eyes are pulled to it. So I know, oops, I made a mistake. I'm going to go ahead and erase that and realize that I should have done 3/2 instead of 2/3. Now I can use my cross simplification, or I can use the GCF to simplify at the end. I'm going to use cross simplification to help you guys get a little bit more familiar with it. Well, 5 and 2, the GCF is 1, but 9 and 3, the GCF is 3. So divided by 3, I get 1. Divided by 3, I get 3. Okay, so now I get 5/3 times 1/2. I multiply straight across, and I get 5/6. sixths. So what that tells me is that 5/9 divided by 2/3 is actually 5/6. So the idea of how to do it is actually fairly simple as well because you're turning it into multiplication. It's just remembering this part. I cannot tell you how important it is to remember and I'm actually going to put it in yellow, multiplication using the reciprocal. You have to use the reciprocal, and it has to be the reciprocal of the divisor. I can't stress that enough, right? I know that I skipped the explore activity number 2. We'll touch base on that at a different point in time. What I would like you to do is I would like you to try the your turn problems that are on the bottom of your page and to come back and check your answers. If you would like, you can go through number 10 with me and then do number 11 on your own. And I do believe that I gave you guys some space in your notes to show your work because I really want to make sure you're doing this correctly. So if you take a look, you'll see that underneath the your turns, I gave you a lot of space. So I gave you some blank space down here. And then on the next page, your guided practice, I gave you space above to show your work so you don't have to worry about finding those extra papers. All right, so if you're going to go through number 10 with me, we're going to go ahead and start now. If you're not, pause it so you can do it on your own. So again, I'm going to take that red pencil and I'm going to circle that 2/5 is my divisor. And I wanted to do that in pencil, not highlighter. And then I'm going to flip it because I need its reciprocal. So it's going to turn from 2/5 to 5/2. And then now that I've done that, I can change it to multiplication of 9/10 times 5/2. 10 and 5 have a GCF of 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 9 and 2 have a GCF of 1, so those can stay. I'm going to rewrite it as 9/2 times 1/2. And if you are somebody who's not comfortable with cross simplification just yet, rewrite your new fractions. All right, it'll definitely help you out. So now I have 9/4 as my answer. However, I cannot leave it as 9/4 because that's improper. I have to change that to a mixed number. So I have to take 9, the dividend, and divide it by 4, the divisor. 4 goes into 9 once. That's my whole number. I can make one group of 4. Twice. I can make 2 groups of 4. And I use 8 pieces when I make those 2 groups of 4. And then I have 1 left over. So we don't say, so that remainder actually becomes our numerator. So in this case, I can make 2 whole groups with 1 piece out of the 4 that I need left over. So my answer is 2 1/4. Okay, and then go ahead and try number 11 and come back and check your answer. So I have 3/5 turns into 5/3. Go back to my regular pencil. I have 9/10. Then I'm going to multiply by 5/3. 10 and 5 have a GCF of 5, so 1 and 2. 9 and 3 have a GCF of 3, so 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. My new multiplication problem is 3/2 times 1. So I know my answer is 3/2. But again, I have to take that 3/2 and make it into a mixed number. So I take my dividend and divide it by my divisor, and I get one group of 2. I use 2 pieces, and I have 1 left over. So I make 1 whole group with 1 piece out of the 2 I need to make a whole group. So I get 1 1/2. All right, so you have your problems here that you need to try on your own. And again, I gave you the space. I will tell you that for reciprocals, you don't have any work to show unless you're justifying. So if this were to say find the reciprocal, justify your answer. So if it said justify your answer, you would be showing me the multiplication problem. So 2/3. What's the reciprocal? Well, 2/3 times 3/2 equals 6/6, which equals 1. So 3/2 would be my answer. That would be justifying your answer. In this case, I just want the reciprocal. If you want to check your answer, you can do this math as well. Okay? So make sure that you go through. You're doing 1 through 7. Okay, take your time in explaining. If you want to say, 1, I do this, 2, that's fine. You can do it step by step, that's fine. And as always, if you have any questions, please be sure to email me or write them down so we can go over them in class.